This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I hope you all had a happy holiday. I hope you all had a good, New Year's, everything like that. We got a lot to talk about in today's episode. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all of a couple of things. First of all, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. You can do it really easily, really quickly. Just go to the main page of our show, the GSMC Sports Podcast, and whatever you're listening to this on, Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you'll see probably in the top right-hand corner-ish, or maybe even dead center, a little button that just has a plus sign next to it and also says subscribe. If you could hit that button for us, that would mean the absolute world to us. You want to subscribe to the podcast for a couple of reasons, but the main one being you want to get those alerts and those notifications on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, on whatever device you might be listening to this on. And again, you'll get those alerts and notifications, and you'll know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast. When we release it, you won't have to go look at Twitter or just go, check casually. You'll get those alerts whenever they are released, and then you can, be one of the first people to listen to a new episode again when we release it. So please, if you could subscribe to the podcast on our main page, whatever application or even website you're listening to this on, Spotify, Apple Music, Podbean, please subscribe to us on all those great platforms. We would really appreciate it. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. Also, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general if you are enjoying the content and discussion points of the show, the production, everything that goes on behind the scenes with our great team as well. So if you're just enjoying the show overall, we'd love it if you leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general on that same main page, on that same website or application. Again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Podbean. You can leave us a review. If you want to write something, you can do that as well, but as long as you just leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, we would really appreciate that if you are enjoying the content of this show just in general. So again, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, in general, anything like that. And also, if you could give us a follow on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. Just overall, we would love to interact with you guys more on there. So if you follow us on all of those great social media platforms, again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Over on social media, we can talk about sports. We can talk about, maybe some NFL playoff games, maybe whatever the main NBA game is on that night on TNT or ESPN. But just overall on social media, we can talk to you guys, again, about sports breaking news, about anything sports related that you guys want to talk about. Social media is the place to do that, especially in real time. Again, with the, landscape of the NFL and NBA always changing, player movement, games happening, trades, injuries, whatever it may be. Social media is the best way to find our immediate reaction, maybe, or something like that. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would absolutely love it. In addition to subscribing to the podcast and leaving us that review, if you could follow us on all those great social media platforms. One more time, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy, healthy during these extremely trying times in the world today. We have a fantastic show for you all today. Later on in the episode, if I can get to it, we obviously are going to be packed with NFL playoff implications, some Deshaun Watson rumors that'll all be coming up later on in the show. I also want to give you my 2 cents on the start that the Brooklyn Nets are having ever since acquiring James Harden. Back-to-back wins against pretty good teams. Orlando is an okay team, but they had a hot start, obviously, to the season. Of course, they just beat the Milwaukee Bucks last night when you're listening to this, so I want to get into that hopefully at the end of the episode, and also why I'm a little bit worried about the Lakers' attitude. That's coming up at the very end of the show. Also, later on in the show, Adam Schefter obviously gave his 2 cents on everything the Deshaun Watson rumors. And while we did hear that he could potentially ask out from some sources close to the Texans and Chris Mortensen, who's obviously highly respected, we hadn't got an Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter bomb, I should say, similar to like a Woj bomb or something like that Watson's officially going to ask out. But we did recently with Adam Schefter saying that he believes that Watson has played his last days as a Houston Texan. So we'll get into the Deshaun Watson rumors. I want to give you a full list of teams that I believe will be interested and what team could give the best Deshaun Watson offer. We'll get into that later on in the show. But of course, we're going to start off with everything NFL playoffs. And the first thing we're going to get into is obviously what Tom Brady did this most recent Sunday. That was the biggest takeaway from my NFL weekend, was definitely Tom Brady. Now, I like to think that I was right about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I told you probably earlier on in the NFL season that I was high on Tampa Bay. I wasn't sure for a fact that they could win this division. I thought New Orleans would get the best of them, but what I said specifically with Tampa Bay was that they were going to be better later on in the season than earlier. That with no training camp, no OTAs, Tom Brady moving his family, new playbook, really new system. Obviously, you can just see it if you watch Tampa Bay games. They don't do the dink and dunk style that Tom Brady is used to playing. They're taking a ton of shots downfield. Tom Brady, I believe, has one of his highest yards per attempt for his entire career, and that's coming at 43 years old when his arm is supposed to be quote unquote, dying or regressing. And in fact, he's throwing the ball with zip. He's throwing the ball with confidence. He's throwing the ball downfield. So I thought that they would be better later on in the year, and that's exactly what happened. I believe they had won 6 out of their last 7 after their bye. They obviously stomped Washington in the first round, and then came that great divisional game between the Saints and the Buccaneers. Now, historically, throughout the season, I don't want to say historically, but really just this season, the Buccaneers got smacked twice by the New Orleans Saints. It wasn't necessarily close in either of those 2 games. The first game, in fact, was actually closer than the second game, and I thought Tampa would be better the second half of the season, which they were, but not against the Saints. From a matchup standpoint, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers do not match up well with the New Orleans Saints. The Saints have a ton of receivers, a ton of weapons. The back end of this secondary for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers definitely has some questions. I like Antoine Winfield Jr., but he is a rookie. I don't love their corners. Of course, they have Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, who sometimes lines up in the slot, Emmanuel Sanders, who's an absolute pass-catching machine, and of course, Drew Brees is the ultimate distributor. We've known that throughout his entire years. The defense of New Orleans always played so physical against Tampa Bay the first 2 games. I was worried that they would get pushed around a little bit, that they wouldn't be able to run the ball. And of course, their pass rush was pretty elite, at least in the 2 games versus the Buccaneers. They pressured Brady a ton, made him feel nervous, made him uncomfortable, sacked him a ton of times. And Brady threw a lot of picks against the against the New Orleans Saints as well in those first 2 games. So again, I wasn't necessarily expecting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win. And again, I didn't pick them to win that game. I thought, again, just from a matchup standpoint, going to the Superdome, one of the hardest places to play. This is Tom Brady in the NFC. Tom Brady had never won at that point in his career back-to-back road playoff games, something he never did for the New England Patriots. But once again, I have learned to not bet against Tom Brady. And again, I consider myself right about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I said that they were going to be better the second half of the season than the first. I said that they were probably going to finish around 11-5 and be a wild card team and be super exciting, but they would have some inconsistencies. I pretty much nailed every single point about Tampa Bay the entire regular season, but I did not expect this from Tampa Bay. And it's all because of one person. It's because of Tom Brady. It isn't because Bruce Arians has somehow figured out the perfect offensive scheme. The play calling seems to be exactly the same as it was last year as it is this year with Jameis Winston versus Tom Brady. The weaponry is obviously there. It's one of the reasons why Tampa Bay made it so far, but they also lost some games against some bad teams like Chicago and some other games as well. So it's not the weaponry that's carrying them. It's not their defense, which has had some inconsistencies as well, even though Todd Bowles is a great coach and I believe deserves a head coaching opportunity. And they obviously have some guys like Ndamukong Suh, White, of course, the linebacker, Levante David, of course, Shaq as well, and then, of course, Antoine Winfield on the back end. All incredible players on that defense, but they gave up a lot of rushing yards the second half of the season. Teams were running the ball on them. And again, I didn't think Tom Brady was going to be able to, in year one, bring the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to the NFC Championship game. It was a tall order, specifically when he didn't win the division. Again, at that point in time, he hadn't won multiple back-to-back road playoff games. He had never done that his entire career. The entire 20-year career of Tom Brady up until that point, 6 Super Bowls. The Patriot dynasty, he had never won back-to-back road playoff games. But yet, at age 43, after moving him and his family to a completely different area, completely new system, new coach, new expectations, new system. On top of all that, the COVID year, no OTA, less practices with the players, struggles out of the gate. Tom Brady, all he does is find a way to win. It doesn't matter that he's 43 years old. He still throws for 40-plus touchdowns a year, has an incredible touchdown-to-interception ratio, finds a way to get all of these guys the ball. Chris Godwin gets the ball. Mike Evans gets the ball. Their 3 tight ends get the ball, or I should say 2, really, with Brait and Rob Gronkowski. O.J. Howard is not much of a factor at this point. Scotty Miller finds ways to get the ball. The kid out of Minnesota finds a way to get the ball. He always just figures it out, man. And it doesn't... There's a couple of things that Tom Brady proved in that game, and things that I didn't think he was going to be able to prove this season. Again, I thought Tom Brady was going to win this divorce for a couple of reasons. One, of course, the talent level that Tampa Bay was at versus the Patriots. Tom Brady left the Patriots not necessarily high and dry. I think a lot of people expected it with the way the relationship was going, specifically after the Jimmy Garoppolo thing and everything like that. At least I did. Tom Brady didn't necessarily leave the Patriots in a bad position on purpose, but there's no offensive weapons with those Patriots team. They don't have an answer at quarterback. The defense is regressing. And while Bill Belichick's an incredible coach, he's lost a lot of great assistants like Brian Flores and Joe Judge and potentially Josh McDaniels, who we'll get to later on in the show as well. And again, it's just hard to keep up. And eventually things are going to break. So the Patriots don't have a great season this year. And Tom Brady met my expectations this year from a record-wise with Tampa Bay. He didn't exceed them. He met them. I thought they'd win 10 or 11 games. Again, be that wild card spot, not win that division because Drew Brees has been running that division for the past couple of years now. I think they would win a playoff game, but then I thought they would lose. Again, Tom Brady had not won back-to-back road playoff games. But again, Tampa Bay now might be the hottest team in football. They beat the Washington football team on the road, and honestly, that looked like a more difficult game for them than this Saints game against an incredible Saints defense with guys like Cam Jordan, Malcolm Jenkins, of course. Some of these hard-hitting guys played so physical the first 2 games, and again, played physical this game as well. It was a back-and-forth, really physical first half, tied at the half, and then in the second half, really, you saw the difference between Brady and Brees, who, while Brady being a lot older, looks about 20 years younger, while Brees looked like, he's regressed because of the age. Drew Brees looked like what happens when your quarterback turns 40. The arm isn't there, the zip isn't there, and just overall regression. Drew Brees threw 1 touchdown, 3 picks. But Tom Brady looks like he's playing as if he's 33 instead of 43, throwing the ball with zip, throwing 2 or 3 touchdowns, no interceptions against a great defense. And while it was difficult for me to believe that Tom Brady would lose to the team 3 times, just the combination of this New Orleans defense, Drew Brees in that offense, already losing to them twice, again, and it wasn't necessarily close. It wasn't like an overtime loss or things like that. And again, no back-to-back road playoff wins for Tom Brady. All Tom Brady does is get better, it appears. He did something this year that he had never done in his entire NFL career. And he's 14-2 in divisional playoff matchups. The second round of the playoffs, Tom Brady has played a full NFL season of just round 2 playoff games, and he's 14-2. Most NFL franchises haven't had a 14-2 season or better in the last 20 years. I'd probably say about 70, maybe even 80, maybe even 90% of the NFL hasn't had a season like that since the year 2000. Tom Brady has a 14-2 record in the second round of the playoffs, and now he's going to, I believe, his 14th championship conference game. He's going to go against Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau. It's going to be one for the ages. It's going to be one for the classics. But I think one thing that Tom Brady proved this year more than anything else is that he's not a system quarterback. And again, I use that term a lot because I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be a system quarterback. I think about 95% of the quarterbacks in this league are. I think a lot of Hall of Fame quarterbacks are. Drew Brees, I believe, is a system quarterback. I think, and the only guys that I didn't consider, guys like Mahomes, guys like Russell Wilson, guys like Aaron Rodgers, these uber talented guys that if it's a West Coast offense, if it's a run-oriented team, if it's a deep ball team, it doesn't matter. They fit the entire profile. Tom Brady's in that category now. That's all he does, no matter what the system is, no matter what the weaponry is, but either New England or Tampa Bay, no matter who the coach is, no matter what the division is, no matter what the conference is, AFC, NFC, Arians, Belichick, great wide receivers, not great wide receivers, bad offensive line, good offensive line, bad defense, good defense, inconsistencies versus he's done it all throughout his entire career. And the only common denominator with Tom Brady is winning. And that's it. And it's really hard for me to sit up here and say, well, he's not going to beat Aaron Rodgers in the NFC Championship game. He can't go to Lambeau and win a 3rd straight road playoff game and take it to them in the snow or something like that, and then obviously go play in the Super Bowl against a Kansas City or against a Buffalo. I've been ranting and raving saying that those 2 teams are playing on a different level than everybody else. But would it surprise me if Tom Brady won his 7th championship with a different team, different organization? I can't say that I would be surprised at this point because all he does is find ways to win. And again, I think what he proved this year is that he wasn't a system quarterback. That all of those things that made the Patriots special over the last 20 years, besides the incredible defense and coaching, how do they make all these wide receivers work? How do they make Julian Edelman, Wes Welker work? Danny Amendola gets brought in. Chris Hogan gets brought in, right? These no-name guys that become all-stars. It wasn't because of Josh McDaniels' scheme or the Patriot way or the Belichick system that those receivers were so productive and that receiver, really that offense was a machine for the better part of 20 years. It was because of Tom Brady. Tom Brady made those receivers better. He made those running backs better. He made the offensive line better. He made everybody better. In my opinion, this year proved for Tom Brady in particular that he wasn't a system quarterback and that the dynasty was more him than Bill. I really do believe that. I understand it's early in this divorce. I know Bill Belichick could turn around, maybe get a guy like Matt Stafford and immediately go back to the playoffs. But in my opinion, and I understand that there's a good chance that Belichick is coaching longer than Brady is playing, but in my opinion, what else does Tom Brady have to prove, right? And again, not that he had to prove anything at this point. I think, in my opinion, entering the season, he was the greatest football player of all time. He's reaching a different level than that now. Tom Brady, specifically if he finds a way to win a championship this year, and I don't even think he necessarily has to, just getting to the NFC Championship game as a wild card with no OTAs, no training camp. Again, the quarterback-receiver connection is so important in the NFL. I don't think a lot of fans understand how important it is to be on the same page with your receivers and know, the receiver knowing the way that the quarterback throws the ball, the way it spins, where he wants it, at least from the quarterback side. Where does the receiver like the ball? Does he like it on the numbers? Does he like it somewhere else? Does he like it, maybe on a different level and things like that? Does he prefer it up high or maybe even a little bit lower or outstretched or things like that? That's the type of things that you have to work on in the offseason with your guys. And with no OTAs and no preseason, Brady didn't get the chance to do that, not just with one receiver, Mike Evans, but he had to do it with a bunch of talented guys who wanted the ball. It wasn't like Tom Brady came into a system with Tampa Bay where it was like, oh, the game plan's easy. We get the ball to Mike Evans here. He's the only guy I need to really work on a relationship with of how he wants the ball and how he wants it in different circumstances, on a different situational plays and ball placement and things like that. He had to do that with Mike Evans. He had to do that with Chris Godwin. He had to do that with Antonio Brown. He probably had to reconnect with Rob Gronkowski, had to do it with Brate, had to do it with even Scotty Miller. So he has 5 or 6 receiving threats that he has to learn where they want the ball, the placement, and have a good, passer to catcher relationship with. And he didn't have the offseason to do that. And all of a sudden, he's in the NFC Championship game. We all said that the NFC is harder than the AFC, that Brady played in a cupcake division, that he was, the backbone of the Patriot dynasty was the 6 wins that they would get from the divisional play. He goes to a harder division and arguably a harder conference, becomes the wild card for the first time in his career, wins back-to-back road playoff games, plays a completely different play style than he's done the past 20 years. He's throwing the ball vertically, has one of his highest yard per attempts on the in the entirety of the NFL. He's 43 years old and he threw over 40 touchdowns after throwing, not great, touchdowns last year, obviously due to the lack of weapons. He's proved that this was more him. And in my opinion, Brady has reached beyond now. And that's how highly I think of this game. I understand it was one game and that Breeze didn't look great. The Saints have choked in the playoffs the last couple of years. But in my opinion, this game really starts a conversation. Maybe the conversation's already started. We already know he's the greatest football player of all time. I think that's undisputable and undeniable. I don't think he's the most talented football player of all time, but he's definitely the best football player of all time. He is the GOAT. He is the greatest of all time when it comes to the game of football. But we need to start talking about Tom Brady as just the best team sport athlete, period. I think a lot of people would tell you that's Michael Jordan. I'm starting to think it's Tom Brady. Even if he doesn't win this 7th championship this year, Michael Jordan couldn't relocate to the Wizards and bring them to an Eastern Conference Finals, right? That never happened. They didn't even make the playoffs. Brady in year 1 with the continuity, even older than Michael was, right? At this point, I'm starting to think Tom Brady might quite literally be the greatest team sport athlete of all time. And again, I'm going to give you my predictions at the end of this week of who do I think is going to win the AFC and NFC championship game. And as of right now, I'm still leaning towards Green Bay because, again, in Lambeau and things like that. But as you watch Tom Brady play, again, this Saints matchup was a nightmare for Tampa Bay from a physicality standpoint, from the weaponry that the Saints had. They've already beaten them twice. Sean Payton knows how to coach against Bruce Arians. They faced off for the better part of the last 4 or 5 years together. Again, they've coached against each other before. The Saints know the Bucs in and out, beat their, twice by, again, not close competition necessarily. And for Brady to walk in there, win again, just it's unbelievable to me that he continues to do it at this level. And Tom Brady, in my opinion, was an underlining story this year. He wasn't the face of the league this year. Was Patrick Mahomes? We weren't ranting and raving about how good the Tampa Bay Bucks were all year, like we were doing for maybe teams like the Steelers early on, or the Browns, or the Bills. They were more storyline teams. And while Tom Brady was obviously the major story at the beginning of the year, as the season went on, and they just kind of became not necessarily another team, but another good team that we'll watch them play on prime time occasionally, but they're not as controversial, as polarizing as the Cleveland Browns or the Buffalo Bills or the Chiefs. And they're in the NFC Championship game, and we're going to get Brady Rodgers on Sunday in Lambeau Field. And while I'm leaning Green Bay right now, as the days go by and as the years go by for Tom, how can you bet against this man? How can you convince yourself that there's no chance that he wins a championship here? Because all he does is prove people wrong. He's, in a new system at 43 years old, and in year one, brings them to the NFC Championship game. I don't think a lot of people predicted it. And again, as someone who got a lot of things right with Tampa Bay about them being better the second half of the season, I was relatively in the ballpark of Brady's stat line with my season predictions. I didn't expect this from them, and I did not think they were going to be able to make it this far in the playoffs. And who knows, maybe Tom Brady will be playing in Tampa Bay for the Super Bowl against a team like the Bills or the Chiefs. It'd be absolutely incredible, but we got to get through the NFC Championship game first. It's going to be so much fun to watch. That's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break, I'll get into some of the other playoff games. What does Aaron Rodgers' historical season mean going forward for the Packers and Jordan Love and things like that? I want to get into that a little bit. And also, what do we expect from the Mahomes versus Josh Allen thriller that we're going to get in the AFC? Of course, later on in the show, I also want to get to the Deshaun Watson rumors. What are the list of teams that I believe he would be willing to be traded to? And then what are the list of teams that I believe will give some serious offers for him? And we'll break down the Schefter tweet. And of course, at the very end of today's show, I do want to get to some basketball, talking about the Brooklyn Nets' hot start with James Harden being acquired. Where does Kyrie Irving fit into that team? And also why I'm a little bit concerned with the Lakers' attitude and mindset during some of these big-time, prime-time games. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my opinion on everything Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, I thought that they would be better the second half of the season. I thought they would be a good team. I thought they would get out of the first round of the playoffs. But for them to get to the NFC Championship game in year one of the Brady era, again, he is already committed to playing next year, so has Rob Gronkowski. Wouldn't surprise me if he signed another 2-3 year extension after that. Tom Brady can play as long as he wants to, and as long as he's playing at an elite level. Right now, Tom Brady is still a top 10, probably top 7 quarterback in the league. You could probably make the argument that he's top 5. And again, 14-2 record in the second round of the playoffs is ridiculous. A lot of teams, a lot of franchises haven't had a 14-2 season in the past 20 years, and that's absolutely crazy for Tom, and he's playing in his 14th championship game where he has a winning record in those as well. It's going to be interesting to see that game versus Green Bay. Green Bay's playing with a lot of confidence right now as well, and we'll get to them in this segment, but man, it's really hard to bet against Tom Brady and try to convince yourself that he's not going to win the big game, which all he's done the past 20 years is win the big game, regardless of team, regardless of system, regardless of division or conference or opponent. It's absolutely incredible. It's awesome to watch, and I cannot wait for this weekend of football action. Speaking of which, of course, the great game that was also over the weekend was the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Cleveland Browns. I told you that Cleveland was probably going to keep it closer than people thought it was going to be. I didn't believe that the line was going to be minus 10.5 or anything like that. Obviously, it started off a little bit slow for Cleveland. Patrick Mahomes gets hurt with that concussion, but about 8 minutes left in the third quarter. They rally all the way back. They have to get one more stop, and Chad Henne is in the game for the Kansas City Chiefs after he essentially gifted the comeback by throwing those interceptions and things like that to allow Cleveland to get back into the game. Comes down to a 3rd and 14. Chad Henne hikes the ball, runs for about 13.5 yards, gets it to 4th and 1, and of course Andy Reid, who it was already a gutsy call to throw the ball on that 3rd and 14 play, comes up with his backup quarterback and calls a sprint right sort of out route quickly to Tyreek Hill. They get the first down and ice the game. And one of my other takeaways, besides Tom Brady might be the greatest team sport athlete ever, which was my number one takeaway from this weekend, is Andy Reid underrated as a head coach in this era? No team has hosted 3 straight divisional conference championship games. So again, the Kansas City Chiefs have now been the home team for the last 3 AFC championship games. The only other team that did that was for 3 straight years with Andy Reid in Philadelphia in the NFC. So that's something Bill Belichick hasn't even done. And while Andy Reid definitely gets credit for how good of a coach he is, I don't think a lot of people mention him necessarily when we talk about the best coaches this era has ever seen. And by this era, I mean the last 20 years. Since the turn of the century, who has been the best coach in the NFL? We obviously know that Bill Belichick has been the greatest head coach in the NFL ever, let alone just the past 20 years, right? But number 2, in my opinion, is Andy Reid. I would put him ahead of some of these guys, like Tony Dungy, like Sean Payton, like Pete Carroll, some of these other really successful coaches that have won multiple Super Bowls this year, Tom Coughlin being one of them, of course, as well. Some guys who are retired, still active. Andy Reid has been the second best coach in the NFL the last 20 years. He is the second best coach in this era, and it doesn't look like he's slowing down. The Kansas City Chiefs, assuming Patrick Mahomes plays Sunday against the Bills, is my favorite to win that game, and of course go on and win the Super Bowl. So we could be talking about Andy Reid as back-to-back Super Bowl champions. I understand he's only got the one right now versus Belichick's 6. And again, I'm not saying he's better than Bill Belichick, but in this era, while Bill Belichick has completely dominated it and is definitely the number one head coacher in the NFL in this era, number 2 has to be Andy Reid. He is the best, maybe offensive coach ever. Again, Bill Belichick is the best coach ever, but I think just from a pure offensive and play calling standpoint, I'd have to give it to Andy Reid. And it's really rare that we see as coaches age in the NFL, them changing so much and them switching things up. Again, Andy Reid, while he's aged with the game, he's 66 going on 67 now. He coaches as if he's still a young quarterback whisperer guru like Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan, with that creativity and those motion plays, and also the guts for him to call plays like that with the game on the line, with your backup quarterback Chad Henne calling a sprint right immediately out of the pocket to try to convert that 1-yard play. Again, it sounds easier. It's easier said than done with a backup quarterback who's not the most mobile, who's way on the wrong side of 30, throwing to Tyreek Hill, who again, after Mahomes got knocked out of the game, they had no momentum at that point. The Browns were storming back. All Andy Reid has done since coming to Kansas City is prove his geniusness. I know, and again, a lot of that has to do with Patrick Mahomes, but last night's game, or a couple of nights ago when you're listening to this, really proved to me that Andy Reid deserves more of the credit for the Chiefs' success than we're giving him. I understand that Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, and a lot of people are arguing he might be the most talented quarterback to ever play in the league. And some have speculated that even he might surpass Tom Brady one day if he gets to the level of championships and the level of dominance. And again, they are the clear favorites to win it all if Mahomes is healthy. But Andy Reid deserves more credit for this. And then, again, I don't think we gave him enough credit for the last Super Bowl because, again, how talented Mahomes is. They have incredible weapons with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and Sammy Watkins and some great guys on the defensive end as well with Chris Jones and Tyrann Mathieu. The team is loaded with talent, and it's obviously a Super Bowl roster. But Andy Reid is more than a Super Bowl coach. He's a Hall of Fame coach. He's the best offensive schemer in the game. What he does with motions and things like that is absolutely incredible. Defenses never know where they're going to go with the football. And the way he always finds a way to get Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce open. He schemes them open so well. A lot of NFL coaches in this day and age, specifically older coaches like Andy Reid, want to trick the defense, don't want to get it to their best players, want to somehow scheme the backup tight end open on a fade for the end zone, trick everybody with these plays. Andy Reid is very basic. He's going to be extremely creative in getting his best players open. And the Chiefs, probably better than any other team in the NFL, even when Chad Henne's in the game, are absolutely incredible at getting their best players the ball. And it isn't just Tyreek Hill's speed or Travis Kelce's athletic mismatch. It's the scheming, it's the route running, it's the game planning, and again, the creativeness with the motions and everything like that. So my second biggest takeaway besides, wow, Tom Brady might be the greatest, team sport athlete ever, is Andy Reid, in my opinion, is the clear-cut number 2 best coach in this era that the NFL has seen. And there's a real argument that Andy Reid, specifically if he wins a championship this year and maybe another one or a couple down the line with Patrick Mahomes and potentially a Chiefs dynasty or something like that, is Andy Reid the best offensive play caller this league has ever seen? Because he's seriously making an argument with this with these gutsy calls on 4th and 1 on the biggest stage. Again, when the odds are stacked against you, you have a backup quarterback doing a sprint right against, towards Myles Garrett, one of the best pure edge rushers in the league, against a really physical Cleveland defense. When they need a yard, when you can just punt the ball away and trust your defense to stop Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns, man, it's absolutely incredible to see what Andy Reid does. And that game against the Bills, I hope Mahomes is all right. He obviously has that concussion. He was a little woozy getting up. I don't want to speculate too much, but I have a hard time envisioning him not playing on Sunday. Obviously, it's out of his control with the NFL concussion protocol and things like that, but we have seen guys get a concussion on Sunday and are back for the following week. It wouldn't surprise me at all, though, if he didn't practice a single snap this week. Didn't practice, even Friday or Saturday or do a walkthrough or anything like that. But it's hard for me to believe that Patrick Mahomes will not find a way to play in the AFC Championship game on Sunday versus the Bills. Again, it's going to be so much fun to watch. I want to transition here for a little bit about Aaron Rodgers and what he's doing with the Green Bay Packers. And while Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time, and maybe Patrick Mahomes is the most talented quarterback of all time, there's a real argument that Aaron Rodgers is the most valuable quarterback of all time. Just because he plays for the Green Bay Packers means that free agents aren't going to want to play there, right? No, not a lot of guys are going to move their family to northern, middle of nowhere Wisconsin to play in one of the coldest areas in the entirety of the United States, and things like that. They also don't have an owner, so there's no clear-cut way for Aaron to go to ownership and things like that, or go to a committee or something and be like, hey, we need help. I want you to get this receiver and blah, 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 this. We saw how much the Chiefs listened to Patrick Mahomes when they wanted to draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire and some of these other weapons. And we know how much other coaches use the input of quarterbacks to do future personnel decisions and future receivers and things like that, and who they want to draft, who they want to sign. And, of course, when the Patriots sort of stopped doing that with Tom Brady, it's one of the reasons why he wanted to leave. The Packers don't listen to Aaron Rodgers. They don't necessarily even respect Aaron Rodgers because they drafted his replacement a year ago. But all Aaron Rodgers has done is find a way to win in a non-popular market in Green Bay with a not great receiving core. Devontae Adams, again, Alan Lazard's a nice player. The tight end Tanyan's a nice player. But they really have two dynamic weapons. Aaron Jones, who again, Green Bay might not pay in the offseason, wouldn't surprise me, and Devontae Adams. And they're steamrolling everybody, and they have the best offense in the league by far. And a lot of it has to do with Matt LaFleur. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to do what I used to do with Andy Reid to Matt LaFleur. What he does with the motioning and the play calling is absolutely incredible. That goal line play to Devontae Adams, which was really similar to the Devontae Smith play in the national championship game where he was moving all sorts in the backfield, then gets open just a little bit inside the end zone. Great play calling and everything like that. But what Aaron Rodgers does for Green Bay is he makes that offense run. The play calling is great, and sure, they have a great number one receiver, but again, it's guys like Alan Lazard catching the 50-yard touchdowns and things like that. He makes those guys better in a similar way to how Tom Brady made Edelman, Amendola, and Welker work, these no-name guys that turned into stars. Rodgers does the same thing in Green Bay. And while I went on that huge rant with Tom Brady, and it's totally hard to doubt him, I still think Aaron Rodgers, at least right now at this point in the week, my mind could change when I make my predictions for, Saturday or Sunday's episode, I should say. I still think Aaron Rodgers is going to win that game as of right now. And I think this is Aaron Rodgers' year. I don't know if he'll win the Super Bowl, but the stars are aligning for him after his replacement getting drafted, second year in the LaFleur system. He is the MVP this year. He's having maybe his greatest statistical season, at least since that year he won the Super Bowl, which was, 2011, I want to say, or 2010. It was between 2009 and 2011, I think, is when that season happened where he absolutely popped off. But at the end of the day, man, imagine if they had drafted Justin Jefferson instead of Jordan Love or something like that and got those weapons for Aaron Rodgers. Again, he's playing as if, I'm starting to think Jordan Love is going to get the Jimmy Garoppolo treatment where he's going to sit for 3 or 4 years, pretty much the entirety of his rookie contract, before he even starts a couple of games bearing something crazy. Like for Jimmy Garoppolo only got on the field for Tom Brady because of the Deflategate suspension. I don't see something like that happening with Aaron. Maybe there's, an injury or something that forces him to play. But again, I think he's going to get the Jimmy Garoppolo treatment at this point because Aaron Rodgers is not slowing down anytime soon. And it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what he does in that big game. Again, Brady Rodgers in Lambeau is going to be such a classic. It's quite literally a game that we're going to be talking about for the rest of our lives, whatever the result is, whether if Aaron beats Brady or if Brady gets to another Super Bowl with a different team. It's something that's going to be replayed on NFL Films and NFL Network 10, 20 years down the line from now when both of these guys are long gone in the NFL world and the NFL's eyes. That's going to be an absolute classic. Now, the final thing I want to get to in this segment before I talk about Deshaun Watson in the next one, and of course the NBA at the final segment of today's show, is just a quick report in the LA Rams camp. There is a report coming out that Jared Goff and Sean McVay's relationship needs marriage counseling, that they're not necessarily on the same page. Now, I did speculate at the beginning of the year that, hey, maybe Aaron Rodgers would want to get out of Green Bay and head to a team like the Los Angeles Rams. That was my number one fit for him. I'm not so sure Aaron is going to leave Green Bay as I was at the beginning of the year. He looks engaged with his teammates. He absolutely loves, if you watch the mic'd up, he loves Devontae Adams. They're like best friends on and off the field. And again, I think Green Bay's not going to make, I don't think they're going to push him out the way they pushed Brett out. I mean, one of the reasons why Brett Favre was pushed out, people need to remember, is because the coaching staff was watching Aaron Rodgers every single day in practice probably make these absolutely incredible throws. Like, they knew Aaron Rodgers was going to be a special type of quarterback. They saw it in practice. I don't know if they're getting that same level of confidence from Jordan Love in practice where they're going to want to push Aaron Rodgers out, specifically after an MVP type year and maybe a Super Bowl season if it ends that way for Green Bay. So I don't think they'll go that route. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Los Angeles Rams moved off of Jared Goff, went after a guy in the draft, went after a guy in free agency potentially, were entered in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes. Now, they don't have a lot of draft capital to be able to move, and their cap situation's a little iffy, so I wouldn't put them at one of the favorites, but who knows? They could maybe try to figure out something to work. LA's always been a city of stars, and the Rams are not afraid to trade away multiple draft picks for their stars, guys like Jalen Ramsey, of course. So I could see it potentially. I'm not trying to link Watson and the Rams. I could see them going after a couple of other people in free agency as well. But keep an eye on Matt Stafford for me. I think the Lions are eventually, with the hiring of Dan Campbell, once they get a new GM in there, are going to look to do a full rebuild. Stafford in Los Angeles makes a ton of sense. With the weaponry that they have. That's a name I would keep an eye on. As for Goff, I could totally see him being traded to a team like New Orleans, potentially, after Drew Brees is retired. I could see him being a stopgap guy, maybe in Atlanta for Matt Ryan, something like that, if he were to be moved off of. I could see maybe even the Patriots be interested in a guy like Goff. Not sure how interested, but I could see them maybe, poking around on that. But if it's true that the Rams and Goff might be heading towards a mutual parting of ways, as since him and McVay are not on the same page entirely, it would be really interesting to see Sean McVay with a new quarterback, in my opinion, specifically a mobile guy. I'd love to see him with a little bit of a dual threat quarterback. It would be a lot of fun to watch. All right, that's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break, I want to get to everything Deshaun Watson rumors. I know it's pretty much dedicated, an entire segment of it pretty much for each show that I do now. But again, this is the number one story in the NFL, and it will be the entirety of the offseason. I want to give you a list of teams that I think should be interested. I want to give you also, just sort of a breakdown on everything and where do I think he would go as of today. I'll give you all of those good, opinions and facts right after the short break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my 2 cents on sort of everything, combination of a couple of things, but Kansas City and Green Bay are two really elite teams in this league, and I want to give you my 2 cents on them and where they stand with Aaron Rodgers and, obviously Andy Reid. And again, Andy Reid might be the best offensive coach we've ever seen, period. His gutsy play calling, his scheming, his motion plays are second to nobody, and I think he's honestly at a different level than everybody else when it comes to offensive play calling, including guys like Matt LaFleur, I should say, and of course, Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan. Some of these incredible, bright, young offensive minds just get blown out of the water when it comes to play calling and scheming and tricking the defense. And again, nobody is better at getting the ball to their best players, regardless of who's playing quarterback, apparently, for the Chiefs, than Andy Reid. Nobody is better at doing it than getting Tyreek Hill the ball and Travis Kelce involved. Then it's just absolutely incredible to watch, and it's almost artful at this point. Now, I want to transition now to the Deshaun Watson rumors, and I know I've talked about it a lot, but the rumors just keep evolving each and every day. It started off as a little bit of smoke and some internet rumors of, could Deshaun potentially really want out? Then Chris Mortensen's report about linking him and the Miami Dolphins came out, and now Adam Schefter has come out and said that many believe that Deshaun Watson has played his last snap as a Houston Texan, and that teams have been reaching out. They haven't been willing to trade him at this point, but again, Deshaun has also not spoken to management. Watson's also been tweeting out a bunch of cryptic tweets about him having patience and lack thereof, I should say, and liking a bunch of tweets of him in Dolphin jersey swaps and him in New York Jet things and San Francisco jerseys. So it's better to assume right now that Deshaun Watson is going to ask for a trade. I don't think Houston is going to be able to pull the card of, well, you're under contract, you're going to have to play. It's a new era in sports, and it's a new era in play empowerment. We've seen it in the NBA for the better part of the last 10 years. Since 2010, LeBron James took his talents to South Beach is really when it started. It's making its way over to the NFL now. I really do believe Deshaun Watson is starting a trend, and in my opinion, that this is only going to kickstart small market NFL teams and quarterback controversy rumors. Teams like Jacksonville are going to have to make sure a guy like Trevor Lawrence is happy by the time his rookie contract is up, or who knows, he might want to hit the open market and go speak to some bigger market teams, some more proven winners. I really do believe that this starts a precedent around the league. And again, Deshaun Watson has every right to be unhappy. Houston management is terrible. Houston culture right now, when it comes to the Houston Texans, I should say, that locker room is toxic, apparently, because of Jack Easterby and everything like that. I believe Deshaun Watson will be traded this offseason. He will be playing quarterback for a different team right now. I want to give you a bunch of teams that should be interested. The Miami Dolphins should be interested. The New York Jets should be interested. The LA Rams, like I mentioned. The Indianapolis Colts. San Francisco. Those are the 5 teams, in my opinion, that I believe have a real shot of actually landing Deshaun Watson. Now, actually, I want to take the Rams off that list. I think there are 4 teams that have a real chance at landing Deshaun Watson. The New York Jets, the Miami Dolphins, the Indianapolis Colts, and the San Francisco 49ers. I look at those 4 teams, and I think there is a real chance that they get Deshaun Watson. They are the 4 favorites, in my opinion. Then you have a next group of teams, the LA Rams, the Chicago Bears, the New England Patriots. Don't have a ton of assets to get for Watson, but obviously have a needed quarterback. And who knows, Watson might want to play there over, the Houston Texans or something like that. But let's talk about those four teams. San Francisco should do whatever and however they can get Deshaun Watson. They should. You pair him with Kyle Shanahan in that defense, you're talking about running the NFC for the next 10 years. That's the level of that's how high I would be on San Francisco if they acquired a guy like Deshaun Watson. Talk about Indianapolis. We know how good Frank Wright is an NFL head coach right now. That weaponry is only improving with Michael Pittman. T.Y. Hilton's on the wrong side of 30, but Michael Pittman's developing. Jonathan Taylor, they have one of the best promising young run games in the entire league. That offensive line is incredible, and that defense is also absolutely stacked. So you would also stay within division, so it's unclear if they'd be willing to move him within division, right? San Francisco makes a lot of sense, but they don't necessarily have the assets in terms of draft capital to acquire him. So in my opinion, the 2 favorites as of right now to land Deshaun Watson are the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. And here's the thing. Well, a lot of people are speculating would Deshaun Watson, whenever it's brought up the New York Jets, would Deshaun Watson waive his no-trade clause for the New York Jets? A couple of things. I would say both yes and no. Historically, the Jets have terrible management and maybe not want to play for that owner, right? Deshaun Watson might get turned off by the owner entirely when it comes to the New York Jets and their historical, of dysfunction. But Deshaun Watson wanted to play for Robert Saleh. wanted the Houston Texans to go after Robert Saleh. He's obviously taken the Jets head coach position recently. We know that's news. He's officially signed that. Joe Douglas, in my opinion, is one of the better GMs in the entire league. Drafted Mekhi Becton, Denzel Mims. Mekhi Becton already looks like a top 10 left tackle in football, I think we can all agree upon. He's nailed the Jamal Adams trade when getting all of that draft capital, and I would trust him, specifically if they had to give up all of their first-round picks, to still get guys in the second and third round to surround Deshaun Watson with still some playmakers at the receiver position and things like that. Not to mention, adding Deshaun Watson to New York City brings in a guy like Allen Robinson, maybe in free agency. He would attract those superstar free agent wide receivers. So it would be a home run for the New York Jets. Now, I think because of all those reasons, Deshaun Watson would waive his no-trade clause. But again, it's hard to predict with that owner and, again, that history of instability just with the New York Jets in general. If Deshaun Watson, who has been playing with a lot of instability in Houston, would sign up for that. And then there's the obvious team, the Miami Dolphins, who Chris Mortensen has reported is the number one team that Deshaun Watson would want to go to. He loves the culture that Brian Flores is building right now. And it's not hard, right? They're a 10-win team. And the obvious answer to what their issue is their offense, right? I don't want to just say quarterback. It's their entire offense, right? When you see an NFL team, right, and you're like, okay, here's a blind resume. Their head coach is absolutely incredible, and their defense is arguably the best in the entire league, but they missed the playoffs. The first thing people are going to say is, well, who's your quarterback, right? I don't want to blame Tua Tagovailoa for the entire mishap of the offense for the Dolphins in 2020. They have absolutely no receivers. Tua is used to playing in rhythm and hitting guys in stride and obviously throwing to open receivers. None of these Dolphin receivers can get open, not even Devontae Parker. He's a jump ball specialist. His job isn't to necessarily get open, it's to win the contested catches. And Tua Tagovailoa just wasn't used to that yet. Now, I think regardless of the direction the Miami Dolphins go, which is either go after Deshaun Watson or keep Tua Tagovailoa, they're going to completely redo that wide receiver room. If they hang on to those picks, I guess that they pick Devontae Smith at number 3 and pick another receiver in the second or third round of a draft and probably look at a guy in free agency like Alice Robinson, Chris Godwin, Juju Smith-Schuster would make a lot of sense in Miami as well. So they're going to redo that entire wide receiving room. But if you're the Miami Dolphins, it's interesting to see now that the New York Jets involved. Because again, if you're the Miami Dolphins, can you afford to let Deshaun Watson... It's easy to say, we're going to pass on Deshaun Watson because we don't want to give up all these picks we've accumulated, and we have a promising young quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa. The Dolphins have an easy no to this answer, right? The Jets don't necessarily have that, right? Not a lot of people necessarily believe in Sam Darnold. Same thing with San Francisco. If they're offered Deshaun Watson, it's harder for them to say no when they don't already have a promising young quarterback, right? That your fan base can get behind. The Dolphins have that. But if the Dolphins bypass on Deshaun Watson and he somehow gets traded to the New York Jets, Brian Flores has to look up. And while there are questions about Tua Tagovailoa, and there's also some moments, right, where we've seen some moments from Tua where we're like, wow, he looks like a special type of quarterback. That Arizona game, that New England game, that Bengal game where he looked absolutely incredible, the second half of the Chiefs game where he almost led the comeback, that looked like superstar Tua Tagovailoa. But then we see him in that last week against the Bills, against the Raiders, against Denver, and he looks like a guy that might be a bust in the NFL. We've seen both sides of the aisle, as expected with a rookie quarterback. I'm not saying that's not surprising or anything like that. But without, a Justin Herbert or Andrew Luck type rookie year, there's no way to be absolutely positively sold on Tua Tagovailoa. Even if you're 99%, there's still that 1% that he might be a bust, right? Even if you're all in on him, right? And he's shown some flashes and obviously shown the opposite of that as well. But if you have to look up and you have to play Deshaun Watson twice a year with the New York Jets and Josh Allen twice a year with the Buffalo Bills for the next 10 years, both of those guys are 24 or 25, that's a difficult task for any quarterback. And you'd automatically be starting off for, even if Tua Tagovailoa didn't become a bust and progressed at a normal rate in the NFL and maybe even became a Pro Bowler caliber quarterback, you're talking about Josh Allen and Deshaun Watson, two guys who are both top 5 quarterbacks in the league this year. That's going to be hard for any quarterback to beat. And even if Tua Tagovailoa became a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, he still would be the third best quarterback in that division behind Deshaun Watson and potentially Josh Allen, assuming both of them stay healthy and continue on the path that they're on. So if you're the Miami Dolphins, you have to seriously consider that even if you're not completely sold on the fact that you want to give up all these picks for Deshaun Watson, can you let him fall into the hands of the New York Jets with now a competent GM in Joe Douglas and potentially a competent head coach in Robert Saleh? Again, it's going to be really tough to see that. Not to mention you have to play Bill Belichick twice a year to begin with. It's just going to be harder for the Miami Dolphins going forward. But if they did add a guy like Deshaun Watson, you would arguably have the best coach in the division besides Bill Belichick, obviously, and Brian Flores. You'd have the best defense in the division with what you have and now the best quarterback. That's the recipe that you have for division titles and Super Bowls and AFC championships. And again, I'm a big believer in Tua Tagovailoa. I don't think he's a bust. I think he can develop into a top 10 quarterback in this league, and I think he showed more flashes than mistakes his rookie year. And again, they didn't make the playoffs, but they still had an incredible year in my opinion, and I wouldn't move off of Tua Tagovailoa. But Deshaun Watson is Deshaun Watson, and I don't know if the Miami Dolphins can afford to let Deshaun Watson go to another team, specifically in their own division. So just as a whole, it's going to be really interesting to see the entire Deshaun Watson situation play out going forward. It's going to dominate the NFL offseason when I tell you that. It's already dominating the NFL headlines right now, and we're going into the weekend where the championship games are being played, and we're already talking about player movement. It's NBA-esque. That's the level of Deshaun Watson's headline-grabbing sort of storylines right now with the potential teams he could go to. I expect him to demand a trade potentially before even the end of the season, before the Super Bowl's even being played. It seems like each and every day we get another update about how angry he is, how he's not answering their calls, how he might want out. Sooner rather than later, I believe Deshaun Watson will be demanding a trade from the Houston Texans, and I think the Miami Dolphins and New York Jets are the favorites. If I had to guess and say where he would go right now, this is a completely, not even an educated guess, right? This is a complete crapshoot guess. It's hard for me to believe that the Miami Dolphins wouldn't do this, specifically with that Jets pressure. It's close 1 and 2, but if I had to guess, I would think the Miami Dolphins with all this draft capital, again, they probably feel like they're closer to a Super Bowl than maybe the media thinks they are. And I think they probably believe that they could add Deshaun Watson, that would put them in contention to be the best team in the AFC. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them. So it's going to be interesting to see the entire Deshaun Watson sweepstakes going forward. That's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this final short break, I do want to get to some NBA stuff. And we will 100% be talking about the Brooklyn Nets, a little bit of the Los Angeles Lakers, and maybe even a little bit Kevin Porter Jr. of the Cleveland Cavaliers. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this final short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Again, if you're a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my 2 cents on everything Deshaun Watson. Again, I really do believe at this point in time it's a 2-team race. Again, he also hasn't officially asked for that trade request, but I do think the Dolphins and Jets are frontrunners, assuming Watson would waive his no-trade clause to be a New York Jet. The Dolphins just make so much sense from a winning standpoint. Brian Flores, we know this for a fact. The only thing he genuinely cares about is winning. He benched Tua Tagovailoa twice because he wanted to win those specific games, prioritized winning that game over maybe future development. While he might go at bat for Tua in the media, and I think he truly does believe in Tua Tagovailoa, and I think he's their quarterback going forward, Deshaun Watson's a special, special player, and this is a very special circumstance. It wouldn't surprise me if they were the ones who wanted to pull the trigger. And again, that side of it, can the Dolphins afford to let Deshaun Watson fall into the hands of Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, and the new-look New York Jets, specifically with how good the Bills are doing? Obviously, they're in the AFC Championship game. it's going to be an interesting situation to monitor going forward. For the final segment of today's show, I do want to transition here to the NBA. I want to talk a little bit of basketball. I know the NFL has been dominating headlines recently. That's because of the playoffs and the Watson rumors. Eventually, the NBA will recapture the spotlight as soon as the NFL season ends, most likely. And again, that James Harden trade really made the NBA dominate the sports world for a minute. Speaking of the Harden trade, the Brooklyn Nets are 2-0 since acquiring James Harden. He's averaging a little bit under 30 points. He got a triple-double his first game, a 30-point, absolutely incredible masterpiece game the second game. They beat the Magic and, of course, escaped with a thrilling victory versus the Milwaukee Bucks. And we knew this, right? We knew that James Harden and Kevin Durant were going to work out together. I didn't have any doubts that those two would be the partnership that would be elite. And in my opinion, if Kyrie Irving wasn't even a part of this Brooklyn team, if this was, the Nets would be looking going forward, I'd still pick them to come out of the East. The dynamic duo of Harden and Kevin Durant, the only duo that's better in the league right now than them, in my opinion, is LeBron and AD. I would put them ahead of Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Jokic and Murray, Bam and Butler, Tatum and Brown. I guess you could say Giannis and Drew Holiday / Chris Middleton. I would put, above all of those guys, I would definitely put KD and Harden easily. And they're really close to rivaling LeBron and AD. Now, I do think the Lakers have a better surrounding cast, but I'll get into some Laker concerns I have in a minute here. But at the end of the day, we knew that Kevin Durant and James Harden were going to be able to play well together. I don't think anybody bought into James Harden regressing. He had a bad week his last week in Houston. He just wanted to get out of there. He's still probably the best all-around scorer in the NBA. Kevin Durant's obviously up there as well. And this team is loaded offensively. And I understand that there's some defensive concerns, and they have some concerns with their bench. Wait till the buyout market happens after the trade deadline. Brooklyn will add some guys off the bench, specifically defensively. I like what Jeff Green's doing for that team. But the interesting conversation is Kyrie Irving. So he returned to practice this week. He cited some personal issues and some family issues going on, which is why he missed those games. So I hope he works all those things out. But it is an interesting, just from a basketball fit, where does Kyrie Irving fit on this team? Because KD and Harden shot a lot of shots in that game. Both of them shot a ton out of that ball, specifically in the Milwaukee game, and it's hard to envision Kyrie Irving getting his shots up in comparison to those three. I think it's very clear now, and probably clear also to Kyrie, that he's the third best player on that team. And people have talked about, who needs to be the Chris Bosh in regards to the Miami Heatles or to the Kevin Love earlier. And I think that has to be Kyrie Irving. He needs to be the one that takes the step back. What I would do if I was Steve Nash is I would leave one of those three guys in, probably Kyrie, if I'm being honest with you, with the bench unit and let him be the offensive spark. Not necessarily off the bench because he'd obviously be starting, but with that bench unit. That way Kyrie can get his shots up and still be an effective player. But down the stretch, while Kyrie's an absolutely clutch player, don't get me wrong, and this is probably a good problem for Steve Nash to have, three elite shot creators and shot makers at the end of the game. I would still go KD with the final shot, but against Milwaukee, they gave it to Harden. Wouldn't surprise me if KD would take a lot of those as well. And don't be surprised if Kyrie gets them too. But it is going to be an interesting situation going forward to see how Kyrie Irving exactly fits within this team and within this organization now, specifically given around the mysteriousness of his absence for those couple of weeks. But I think he'll be on the court this weekend, hopefully, which will be absolutely interesting to see, and I'm sure it'll be one of my main talking points in my next episode, is how they all fit together. If they can find a way for all three of them to get 25-plus a game, it'd be hard to say that the Nets aren't even, right up there with the Lakers with championship favorites going forward. Speaking of the Lakers, they have 4 home losses this year. And I'm a little bit worried about them for a couple of reasons. One, they're obviously the best team in the league, right? They have the best duo. They have the best roster. They have a great coach in Frank Vogel. But their mentality is similar to the end of the Warriors dynasty, where it was almost like regular season doesn't matter. We're just waiting to get to the playoffs, yada, yada. I don't know if that works for this team because this team is not as good as the Warriors dynasty, right? The Warriors could go down 10, and then with a blink of an eye, they're up 13 with KD, Steph, and Klay Thompson. This team, not so much. They blew a 20-point lead to Golden State, led by Steph, obviously, last night when you're listening to this. And it was an interesting game. They had about 15-plus point lead multiple times in the game. They kept blowing those leads, right? The Golden State would get close, and the Lakers would wake up and pull away. Well, eventually in the fourth quarter, you let Golden State hang around long enough, they come back and take the lead, and the Lakers can't make the clutch shots at the end of the game. The Lakers need to have the same mentality they had as last year, which was we are not the favorites, right? They were not the favorites last year. The Clippers were. They need to have that same mentality. And it's interesting considering a lot of their roster was actually not with them for the championship team last year. Montrezl Harrell, Wesley Matthews, Dennis Schroeder, those guys did not play for the LA Lakers during the championship run, so you would still think they would have that hungry dog-like mentality. But some of these guys on the roster are just playing as if the regular season doesn't matter, and it's led to 4 losses on the home floor at Staples Center, which is interesting to say the least. So I'm a little bit worried about that mentality. Not too much, but it's definitely something to monitor going forward. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before I let you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and leave us a 5-star/positive review in general. We would greatly appreciate it if you could do all 3 of those things for us. Again, I have been your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and I will see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.